Mike Tomlin's famous mantra is how the standard is the standard, but the new standard in Pittsburgh under him seems to be mediocrity, because that's what the Steelers have been these last 8-9 years under Mike Tomlin. You want to know what's insane? The Jaguars and the Browns, two of the worst ran franchises in the NFL, have more playoff wins than what the Steelers have in the last 9 years. You wouldn't expect that when you think of how poorly ran both the Browns and the Jaguars have been, and how the Steelers are perceived to be the gold standard for what a well-ran organization looks like. But Mike Tomlin, he only gets praise for never having a losing season. But yet, when it comes to being able to have success in the postseason, though, this team always underachieves. You see, the standard in Pittsburgh is to compete for Super Bowls, not to make it to the playoffs. Making it to the playoffs is the bare minimum, because that's to be expected. Mike Tomlin has been doing the bare minimum to keep his job. He's not doing enough to get the Steelers playing back to the standard that they used to play at, which is constantly being in a Super Bowl conversation. When's the last time the Steelers ever went into a season with Super Bowl expectations? It's been a very long time. Mike Tomlin has had future Hall of Fame players that still are on this squad that have yet to have a playoff win. TJ Watt, Mika Fitzpatrick. You know, I feel bad for TJ Watt, for him to have such a great career, to be a future first ballot Hall of Famer, but to not have a taste of success in the postseason. It's an indictment, and it's a crime on Mike Tomlin's behalf, because a guy like TJ Watt should be playing in the biggest games and the biggest stage in late January. Against the Baltimore Ravens and the Steelers' wild card round loss, during that game, you had Kurt Herbstreit and Al Michaels questioning the heart of the Steelers. That's something that I thought would never be a question when it came to a Mike Tomlin coach team. You can say what you want about the offense always being terrible, the defense underperforming every time they go up against the elite quarterback, but something that I never thought would be a question is the heart that the Steelers will play with under Mike Tomlin, for somebody who's supposed to be a player's coach, for somebody who always has a lot of respect and admiration out of his locker room. You didn't see that this past weekend. And we know that Mike Tomlin isn't going anywhere. He's not going to get fired. He has a no trade clause. Mike Tomlin is only going to go when he wants to go. But the big issues with the Steelers are that you have a head coach who is labeled to be elite, but yet he doesn't have a good coaching tree. Mike Tomlin, when's the last time he ever had an offensive coordinator or a defensive coordinator that got hired to become a head coach? Elite head coaches put their coordinators into position to become head coaches. Because when you have a head coach that constantly wins, that constantly makes the right hires, other teams want to replicate that formula. But for some reason, no other franchise in the NFL wants to replicate Mike Tomlin's formula from anybody that's coaching under him. One of the biggest mistakes that Mike Tomlin has made was keeping Terrell Austin as the defensive coordinator over Brian Flores. There's no reason why Brian Flores should have ever been allowed to leave the building of the Pittsburgh Steelers unless he was leaving for a head coaching opportunity. It makes me sick to know that Brian Flores is dominating as the defensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings when the Steelers had this guy right underneath their nose and Mike Tomlin let him walk out. It makes me really upset how the Steelers continue to have a terrible offense year after year and no plan at quarterback under Mike Tomlin. I'm not going to give him all the blame for how this team has constantly underachieved, because some of this blame does have to fall on Lamar. The failure to find a long-term solution at quarterback, the constant whiffs in the first round. Let's be honest about Broderick Jones. We've seen enough out of him these last couple of years to know that he's a bust. It doesn't take this long to find out if you have a franchise offensive tackle or not. And Broderick Jones is another miss that the Steelers have made when it comes to a first-round selection on offense. Najee Harris, he's a huge miss. He's not a bust, but he's not what you expect out of a first-round back. When you draft a running back in the first round of the draft, you expect to see an explosive athlete. Saquon Barkley, every time he touches the ball, you see the explosiveness. You see the home run threat. You don't see that out of Najee Harris. The Pittsburgh Steelers, under Mike Tomlin, they've become a franchise that's been okay with the bare minimum. They've been okay with mediocrity. They've been okay with never having a losing season, but never being able to get anywhere further than the first round of the NFL playoffs, because that's what the new standard is under Mike Tomlin. We now, as Steeler fans, have to be okay with mediocrity because we want to give participation trophies to a guy who can win in the regular season but can't win when it matters the most. Having a winning season doesn't define if the Steelers had a successful season or not. What defines how successful of a season the Steelers have had all depends on what they do in the postseason, because that's to be expected when you coach for an organization that's rooted in so much tradition and pageantry. When you think about the NFL and you think about the history of this league, you always think about Pittsburgh. You think of Terry Bradshaw, Lynn Swann, the still current defense with Mean Joe Green. And to have so much history and for the standard to constantly go down every single season under Mike Tomlin is a really big disappointment. And I'm tired of Mike Tomlin. I want to see a change. I know it's not going to happen, but it needs to happen because they're doing nothing but just walking in place. You know, Mike Tomlin always has great quotables. And one of my favorite ones that he had this year is that insanity is doing the same thing over again and getting the same results. But that's what he continues to do. That's what this franchise continues to do. You know, I don't know who deserves the boatload of the blame for what the Steelers have constantly been these last couple of years. But Mike Tomlin, I'm going to give him the most of it because let's not act like he didn't waste the prime years of the Killer Bees when you had Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, and Big Ben Roethlisberger. He was underachieving with those guys. He lost to an interim head coach when they went up against the Cleveland Browns in the wild card round in 2020. I will never forget when the Steelers lost, having home field advantage and the first round bye to Blake Bortles and Leonard Fournette. I'm sick of the excuses when it comes to Mike Tomlin. He may be a good head coach. He may be able to go elsewhere and have success. But you can't keep asking, who are we going to hire that's going to be better than Mike Tomlin? When you're in a relationship that isn't working out, you don't keep holding on to it just because you're scared you can't find nothing better. How do you know if you can't do better if you at least don't try? And the Steelers aren't trying. They keep holding on to a guy that obviously has peaked. Sometimes you have great head coaches that they do all they can do. They reach a certain level with the organization, and they're unable to go any further. Prime example, Andy Reid with the Philadelphia Eagles. He was never able to win a Super Bowl in all his years being the head coach of the Eagles. So what did they do? They fired him. They brought in Doug Peterson, and boom, they won a Super Bowl. And Andy Reid eventually ended up winning the Super Bowl when he got Patrick Mahomes when he became the head coach of the Kansas City Chiefs. Even if you give Mike Tomlin the quarterback, the defense still sucks. The defense still continues to get shredded up every time they go up against an elite offense led by an elite quarterback. Lamar Jackson, before halftime during this wild card round loss, he was playing around with the Steelers defense. I mean, the dude was running around, throwing touchdowns, and then immediately going to the locker room before the half ended. The Ravens didn't take the Steelers seriously. During Hard Knocks, John Harbaugh was saying how you don't really have to worry too much about Russell Wilson because he's nothing to be worried about. He's not going to throw in the middle of the field. The only thing he's going to throw is moon balls downfield and check downs to the running backs, and that's it. Mediocrity is the standard in Pittsburgh now under Mike Tomlin, and that's what us as Steelers fans have to be okay with because we shouldn't be mad at a head coach who's never had a losing season. We should be okay with a head coach who constantly underachieves come playoff time, when this is a franchise that has never been defined about having a winning season, being happy to make it to the playoffs. This is a franchise that has built the reputation that they've built, that has had the tradition and the history that they've had, because they've been known for getting it done in the biggest moment during the biggest stretch of the season, which is making deep playoff runs and winning Super Bowls.